less is more until you need more.
I think most people that are learning get into the experimenting with technology mindset way too early.
Yeah, I know 6 languages, but I haven't really built shit in any of them. Right? You don't know.
Welcome back to the semi-final episode of Backend Banter. I'm joined today by Chuck. Full name? Do you go by Chuck? How does this work?
Well, only because we're friends, Lane. On the internet, I am known as Charles William Carpenter III, and any of those can become kind of a nickname or quasi other AKA moniker.
Don't call him Chuck.
Yeah, don't do that. That's just for friends and family. That's behind. And now you've doxed me, basically.
It's a big secret that a common nickname for Charles is Chuck.
Yeah. Well,
I guess Better Call Saul let that one out of the bag, actually.
Right, yeah, those guys. We've been in litigation for a while, so I don't want to talk about that anymore. Also, this whole thing was a farce. You said you were coming on my show. This is your show? Oh, holy, I got to change everything.
I've been waiting to get on your show. No whiskey in the mail.
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm dry. I'm sober. What's going on?
This is all. There's so many mistakes happening. No one actually wants to talk to me sober, so this ought to be really interesting for you.
The jokes. Well, do you listen to your podcast after? Do you just send the episodes, or do you listen to them after you ship them?
Not usually. I usually don't listen. Yeah, because I don't like the sound of my own voice. I don't know if this is also true for you or whatever. I don't do the editing. So I don't listen in that sense. I have come back to them to make a reference, or Robbie Wagner, my co-host, he said, "Oh, you sounded really weird in this one," and so then I'll listen in order to pick up on what he was talking about. But in general, no.
I do listen. I haven't been doing it as long as you, I don't think. How many episodes are you guys on?
Ooh, I feel like we're coming up on 150. Somewhere around there. Okay. So it's 2.5 years. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, I've been doing it for just over 1 year, and I am used to the sound of my own voice. That doesn't bother me anymore. But it is quite time consuming. I do have someone editing, but then I always listen to the final edit on 2x speed before we ship it, just to make sure that something weird didn't make its way in there.
So you always talk like this fast, and you're like the Micro Machines guys from the 80s, yeah.
That segment's going to sound really weird on 2x speed.
Yeah, it's going to be insane. I have no idea what I'm saying. And I will actually sound like the Micro Machines guy. I don't know if you remember those commercials.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, this is because I'm old. You just look old. I am old. So Micro Machines were basically tiny Hot Wheels. And for whatever reason, they had this guy that spoke really fast, do all the commercials. Micro Machines, yeah. So that's a TLDR for you. This is a banter. We're going to go heavy on the banter, it seems, in this particular episode. So
there's a lot of arguments.
Anybody who's heard me on the internet expected that, though. They're like, "Oh, that guy, yeah, a lot of banter, totally full of shit."
I guess. Speaking of banter, we might as well kick it off with the most controversial topic that I've got for us.
All right.
The question is: are celebrity devs a good thing? And maybe we should start by defining what is a celebrity dev or a celebrity developer.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting thing. So are they a celebrity because they have lots of followers? Are they a celebrity because in the traditional term, right? You think of it as someone whose career or whatever, they entertain and do kind of make money at that. It's almost like there's the profession aspect of it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I view it, I think. But I think there are some, say, Ken Wheeler, who's very well known, but he's not necessarily a celebrity dev in the sense of that he's creating content. So we agree that it's, say, folks like ThePrimeagen, right, who's streaming, he's across various mediums, he has a few different channels, that kind of thing, that sort of celebrity dev. Yeah, I think so. I think it's good on a couple of different levels. I like that there's a number of them now. It's not so niche that you can kind of find a voice that resonates with you. It's kind of like podcasts, right? Tech podcasts, there's various ones, and I think folks will gravitate towards a voice that sort of speaks and resonates with them, subject matters that they're interested in. So I think it's like helpful across a lot of different ways. The only thing that probably annoys me from time to time with some folks who are celebrity devs, or they think like the buck stops with them and their opinion is kind of like it, and you're an idiot otherwise. And there are some folks that are a little more like that out there in the arena, and hey, they're free and welcome to publish their content. But for me, those are the ones that are a little more like damaging and disingenuous.
So, okay, I'm going to get to that part in just a second. But first, I want to understand what we're talking about when we say celebrity dev. So you said like Ken Wheeler, for example. He's pretty well known. Maybe another example might be like Linus Torvalds. It's like extremely well known for his development career, but like does not make money off of media, right? Like isn't a podcast host, doesn't have a YouTube channel where he's collecting ad revenue. Yeah. And we're kind of differentiating between that type of a celebrity dev who like absolutely has influence in the industry, right? Like Linus Torvalds says something at a talk, like people listen to him, but he's not in the business of entertainment is maybe the distinction.
Yeah, is not in the business of entertainment and is more of an educator, I would say. More that way, like
he's not even really in the business of education either. Like
right.
Not to say he's not an educator. I think, his stuff's very educational, but like he's not like running a coding boot camp or like teaching at a university, right?
Yeah, I suppose in that sense. But more of but what's the word I'm thinking of? Because his content is about like trying to illuminate ideas or educate people on concepts or solutions or outcomes that he's come to a conclusion on, and people pay attention because he's a subject matter expert. Maybe in much of the way, okay, let's get outside of tech and think about like Warren Buffett, right? Everybody pretty much knows who that is. Would you necessarily classify him as a celebrity? Not necessarily. I mean, I think that's an artifact of his outcomes because he's been known to be like basically an expert in a particular area. He does talks and the shareholder meetings, they get published that people look to for signals in financial markets and investment advice to a degree, right? But like that's not someone who's seeking to entertain or like, yeah, I always think about celebrity as being like someone who tries to elicit fans. Like you might tangentially get fans, but if you're seeking to get followers and fans and subscribers in that way, you're a celebrity and you made a movie, you want people to buy tickets to see your movie, to pay to stream it and whatever those things are. So I don't know, just my own like mental divide there is kind of that. It's like sort of what are you seeking out? What is your output and input versus someone who's just a subject matter expert, like who just becomes a celebrity because you're known as one of the best at this. Because
I mean, it seems pretty non-controversial for me to just say like this type of celebrity where you're just known for what you've done, right? Creating Git, leading the Linux project, like that's not bad. That's just gonna happen. But then, maybe the opinions around celebrity developers are more nuanced. And I mean, it's interesting to talk about because like, you and I both host podcasts. And like, what is a podcast if not? Right. I mean, I didn't ship Git. What is a podcast if not, there to get more subscribers to your RSS feed, right? Get more people listening. I mean, we don't advertise on this podcast, but we shill Boot.dev at every chance that we have, right? So there is a financial incentive for me to do this podcast. And, I would argue almost all podcasts, I actually don't know of any podcast that's reached any, type of size where it's not some kind of business. You need to get to a certain size for it to be viable. But once you get to that size, I mean, pretty much all podcasts are either collecting YouTube revenue, they're selling ad spots on the podcast itself, or like like this podcast, there's some product behind the podcast that's gaining exposure through it.
I was going to say, so, okay, I want to regress like one step back because the term celebrity has something to do with like being well known. But the vocation, right? Like, so Linus, Warren Buffett, like these are more probably closer to the academics side, right? So education, and there's a business aspect to it, but like I consider that a little more academic. Vocationally, we are creating a podcast. We're entertainers. Now, whether we're known or not, that's the celebrity aspect. But
Whether
you can
we're
definitely
good entertainers or not.
Yeah,
is
right. Exactly.
up for
That's all
debate.
completely subjective. Again, across the board, we create these for entertainment purposes. And then as an artifact of that, maybe these other things happen. Maybe somebody gets, a Boot.dev subscription, which is highly recommended, by the way. Boot.dev. Sign up. Do you like gaming? Do you like learning? Do you think the Backend has a future? Boot.dev. Anyway,
Couldn't
you're
have done
welcome.
it better myself.
Yeah. I just made that up on the spot too. I haven't been practicing that. But yeah, so okay, we make this because there's an entertainment aspect to it. We probably find it at least a little fun. And then as an artifact of that, does someone sponsor Whiskey Web and Whatnot? Does someone sign up for Boot.dev? Like some of these are some of the reasons why we continue to do it as well, because otherwise we can't afford to spend the time and money into this in perpetuity. So I think the fact that they're devs, they're developers, and they choose that subject matter to sort of be a part of the entertainment that they're putting forth. And then if it's good or people resonate with it, they become celebrity, right? And so, yes, I think in general it's good. I think it is an interesting artifact of how many times I can say the word artifact. And then also what has happened kind of in our career track, like as web developers, software engineers, this like giant umbrella of things, like what it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Like it's very different culturally. It's very different in like the number of people who've become interested because, for a little bit it had become kind of a lifestyle driver, right? Because salaries are higher, the needs are all over the place. You just learn React in 12 weeks and make six figures. Like all these like crazy things that were happening as well. Like it's different from the nerd culture, like for lack of better terms of like when I was first starting out, it was, senior devs would like throw a bag of Funyuns at you and tell you RTFM. And that's how you sort of had to grind away and either wash out or make it work. And it's weird to think like those guys would ever, smart people, but not entertainers, and definitely wouldn't be streaming code and becoming celebrities on the internet. Like it's crazy when you think about those things. But at the end of the day, like some of them are nice people and it can be fun. And so why not? I don't know.
Yeah, the culture of it's very interesting. There's some. I know everyone has like a different YouTube bubble.
Yeah. But
like the people I see the most are Fireship, Primeagen, Theo, Low Level Learning. These are all people with like six-figure subscriber counts on YouTube. And it is very interesting to think about like how their content shapes the world of development as a whole, right? Because I mean, I love their content, and they're always introducing me to new stuff, but like it would be wrong to say that what videos they choose to make doesn't impact what technologies and frameworks and methodologies are being chosen by companies that are starting, this year, last year. And I'm not saying that's good or bad necessarily, but it's different because it that's not how it used to work, right? It used to like these decisions were not driven by a series of YouTube videos that got released on a large influencer's channel.
I mean, because they constantly need to chase like hot new things. Like you can't talk about Next.js for 52 episodes in a row in the same sort of thing, right? Like reality doesn't translate well, I think, to some of these channels. So I do think if I'm trying to, a negative that kind of comes up when I think about that aspect of it is that there's always this hot new recency syndrome thing. And like when plenty of other tools that aren't hot new are probably good enough for like 80 to 90% of your use cases, like these crazy nuances that come along that require ABC new feature, it's probably okay to keep trudging along in your Rails app or something. It's like, so that's probably a negative.
I might be too young because YouTube's been around the whole time I've been a developer. Granted, like YouTube culture has gotten a lot bigger and a lot different in the last decade.
Yeah, for sure.
And like tech YouTube in particular is much larger than it used to be. But as far back as I can remember, there was always hot new shit. And, in 2010, Rails was hot new shit. It was just people were reading about it on like 37 Signals blog, right? And talking about it on forums instead of seeing it on a YouTube video. And I wonder if tech YouTube and tech Twitch has just accelerated.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I think the echoes are louder and stronger. And yes, I would say that like there's always something bubbling up every few years. I just think those cycles have accelerated because of these louder, larger bubbles. Like you said, you're reading on 37 Signals blog, and that's because maybe you subscribe to a newsletter that happened to come up with the thing that you are hearing about now. Like it was a lot harder and a lot slower to kind of get these updates and information, and it also depended on where you were. Like, I live in Phoenix now. I started my career here, but I lived in DC for a while. And when you're in DC and like a media hub and politics and all of that, you actually were getting a good feed of new tools. And I worked for a big company, and so like that kind of helped a little bit compared to some other places. So I think like, well, as with many things, it kind of depends on where you're at and what influences you're getting, but I do think like it's accelerated regardless for more people.
Yeah,
it might not be their reality, but it's exciting and interesting. Oh, I heard about this Zig thing. Like I'm at a place where we're writing PHP and WordPress plugins, and it's plenty good. It's a good job. There's nothing wrong with that. But man, look at this shiny hot thing over here. So I don't know. Yeah. The tools are more serious now too, like to some degree, potentially, like accessible and serious.
So to listeners of this pod, I mean, they know, like, I'm good friends with ThePrimeagen. He just launched a course on Boot.dev. And one of the things I really liked about him in particular, as opposed to some other YouTubers that I saw maybe 2 to 3 years ago, was that instead of just talking about JavaScript all the goddamn time, I got to see some Rust, some Go, some tooling, some stuff that I think 5 or 6 years ago wasn't viewed as hip and cool, and you didn't see the guy with the MacBook and the beanie talking about it. But like it's kind of becoming cool again. Using the terminal, like that wasn't cool when I started. Like IDEs were the thing that serious people used. Terminals were for old people. Like it's kind of come back.
You came up in a different era than me. I definitely had to learn Git through command line if I was even gonna like don't even bother downloading something. Like I think I had come in and I was using Subversion and I had like Tower or something. I can't remember. There was an app and it was like and then we used Git at a new place and they were like, no, you can't do that. No, we're gonna get in there, figure out what rebase is, do it all through terminal. Now, that is to say, my text editor and all that kind of stuff, I never really got into Vim. Because I'm not that smart, but there were some other tools that I was forced to go through, like hard mode. So, and I think that's a good thing. And then you make a choice to like shortcut when you understand the edges.
Yeah, for me it was similar with Git, but like I did a lot of C++ in college, and I was just on a Windows machine. I just used Visual Studio, and it like took care of all the like compiling and running and stuff. And it was just kind of magic to me. Like I just pressed the green button to run the code and never learned how to, use my terminal to interact with the tooling. But what I think is interesting is, like I said, I love Prime's content. He is always talking about new stuff. That's the nature of how YouTube works. If you're not, like, you're just not going to do well on YouTube. I think the more successful developers, here's where I get to my theory, and I'm interested to hear what you think. I think the more successful developers of this year and last year, let's say 2023, 2024, are the ones that are capable of staying up to date on news and technology movements and stuff, but have no problem just like shipping stuff in their current stack. Like resisting the urge to at every week when a new video comes out, introduce something new into the stack at work. I think just being able to stay sane inside the noise is going to be something that not everyone can do. Yeah.
I mean, I think another fuzzy thing that has happened over the last 5 to 10 years is this like accelerant of career tracking, right? Like these career ladders and getting to senior in 5 years or less. And good for you if you were able to do that. I just think that there's some of those boxes that just cannot be checked off without time, experience, failures, depth and breadth of problems that you've just had to go through and take time and take, a year in this project and 2 years over here and kind of touching different aspects of said projects. And so all that is to say is that in my experience, there becomes a time where like you're interested and you're understanding, and like kind of what I'm reading between the lines in your comment there is that you have some maturity to understand that it's not a good fit. It's not worth the trade-offs, for what the tools are that you already have that are kind of checking the boxes and serving the business. Because at the end of the day, your career isn't to be the smartest, part of that business. The exchange of money for your services is to use your experience and knowledge to make the best business decisions. And rewriting your app so that you get to use Rust may not always be the best business decision, right? So
yeah, that's absolutely it for people that are in jobs, and for learners, I think the ability to stay focused and learn kind of the fundamentals that you need to learn is an uncommon trait, but a necessary one. And I see this all the time with students. They'll hop in, they'll do our first course. We got 22 courses I got to check in our learning path, right? Like it's not a trivial amount of coding that we want you to do before you start looking for a job. Yeah, there's 24 courses at the moment. And we get a lot of students that get through like the first 2 or 3, which is like learn kind of coding basics in Python, shells and terminals, Git. And then they're like, I heard about OCaml.
Right.
And then 4 weeks later, they've watched a bunch of stuff on OCaml, probably haven't written a line of code yet.
Yeah. They're jazzed
OCaml.
Though, right? Yeah.
They're super jazzed about it. And not to say that OCaml's not cool. It's pretty cool. Same with Rust, same with whatever.
Sure.
But they'll jump from like they'll buy like 7 books, read the first chapter of all 7 of them, buy 6 courses on Udemy. It's like just the ability to focus and get through the fundamentals. All that like experimentation, I think is fantastic. But I think most people that are learning get into the experimenting with technology mindset way too early. Whereas, like, I think experimenting with problems is really great. Like, I think a great way to learn is to solve real problems. But, like, it doesn't mean you need to solve that problem with Laravel and Rails and, a Go server and Next. Like, maybe you can just solve it one way.
No, you should. That sounds like a great stack. These are all future podcast sponsors. I have to say they're all good, right? Yeah. No, I think, the biggest miss in that, in, like, starting your courses or something, or whatever you're starting, is that you just need to build some things and you need to start to understand where the boundaries are at, right? Like where you start bonking your head and you have some problems that you still try to work through in said framework or language. And then like the next time around and you decide, well, this one I'm going to use OCaml. Great. I went down this path. I built this thing with Python. It does ABC. It's pretty cool, but, I'm going to try something else for the next project. Then you experience a different set of pros and cons and trade-offs. Learning those things is pretty key. You can't just skim the top and say, oh, yeah, I know 6 languages, but I haven't really built shit in any of them. Like, right? You don't know. Yeah. You know how to pick up a language, like syntax and fundamentals. Great. Guess what? There's tons of overlap there. It's not that hard.
Now for the cleanest transition in the history of this podcast, I'm going to ask a completely unrelated question.
Perfect.
what is wrong with full stack web application frameworks? And what's the difference between like a full stack web application framework and in your words, according to these notes, the Frankenstein stacks of the modern era?
Well, I mean, you have gleaned in enough to understand that I don't really think there's anything wrong with real full stack application frameworks, right? Like they have staying power for a reason. And
can you give an example so everybody knows?
Yeah, sure. We already said Rails, so let's say Django, for example.
Okay.
So to me, where the full stack in that sense is that you have like an ORM or some sort of database management aspect of it. You have the ability to build the APIs. You can serve to the browser the entire front end. Also comes with things that you absolutely must have for a web application, like authentication models, right? Like that setup comes out of the box, and things that you also need for your web application, such as mailing, right? Without those things, how can you have an actual like web app in the way that we think of them? I think most people would agree, like those are all things you need to build a web application, right? You can't necessarily, I mean, that's becoming grayer these days, but like, okay, let me go with an easier. You can't take like SvelteKit and have a full, like you can't just create that and then deploy it and have a full web application, right? There's a ton missing there. So that's not necessarily a full stack application. Now, if you like throw an Express server along with it, you have more, but you still don't have it all. And to me, over time, and there's tons of businesses built upon this, of the pieces of that, of giving you that ease, taking that power away from you. Just add, an Auth0 or whatever, authentication provider. Works fine. There's nothing wrong with that per se. But these are all choices now that you need to make down that path. And at various times in my career, I've been through some of that, like working with React. Like when it came out early on, I actually deployed the first React component for National Geographic, and I thought it was amazing. Reactivity on the front end, super cool. Love this. Was coming from like Backbone that was trying to MVC front end applications, and it was just so complex. Getting some wins early on, but then you started to go down the path of I want to build a web application with React. Well, React isn't all of that, right? So now you have to choose your own adventure throughout that path. Like, how are you going to get the rest of the parts of it? And that started to become very frustrating. So I just see it as another iteration. Now, some of those choices are a lot smarter now. Like, they're a lot easier, they're a lot straightforward. There's better guardrails there for mistakes and security issues and all of that. But it's still making these choices. And also, like, if you're a business, you are basically attaching the security of your application, the data, like giving your data off. There's a lot of things that you're like sharing with these businesses in order to run your business. You're assuming that Supabase will be around for the next 10 years. Supabase is great. Right. Hopefully they are, but it's managed Postgres. So now that, and they give you auth and they give you other parts, but how much are you going to give away in order to like simplify that implementation? Yeah, I might have lost the point of your question. I think we defined what I think a full stack framework is, but outside of that, I forgot the rest.
No, we defined it. And now's when we get to the banter part. This will be fun.
Okay.
We're going to play a game.
All right.
So the second part of the question was, it's really just the term Frankenstein that I think makes this fun. Because I think the word Frankenstein implies like a negative connotation. Right. So I'm going to describe to you the Boot.dev web application stack. And I want you to tell me how Frankenstein it is. Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This will be fun. Okay. So there's two main components, the stack. We've got a Go server on the back end. Actually, there's technically 6 little Go microservices. There's really just one main one.
That's the most Go thing ever, though. That's what it does well. Microservices.
You can't not.
No, I love it. Yeah.
Come on. Yeah. There's really just actually one giant service, and then there's 5 little tiny services that do like very specific and niche things.
Okay.
Yeah. Those Go binaries, they're all just statically compiled Go servers. They run in very slim Docker containers in Kubernetes. in Google Cloud Platform. That's the backend. The one service is kind of the API gateway, so everything just hits the one service, and sometimes it makes requests to the other services if it needs to do special stuff. Okay, that's the backend. And then we've got a Nuxt, not Next. It's like, it drives me nuts.
Yeah, I know it though. We dallianced in Nuxt for a little bit, and it's the best parts of Next for me. But so
I like it.
I ain't hating. Yeah.
For what we're using it for. I want to be very clear. We are using it in the most minimal way possible. It's running on Cloudflare pages, and we call it our front end, which to a lot of front end developers sounds weird. Because like, wait, Nuxt, that's a backend framework. I don't consider it a backend framework.
What? Who are these people? I'm going to say right now, I would never, ever think that was a back-end framework. Now I would say...
You're kind of a Rails guy, right? Like,
no, I don't. I'm not a Rails guy. I mean, I like DHH and stuff. I have never written a Rails application in my life. I just am like aligning myself more and more with some of these ideologies as I get older.
Okay.
Yeah. I did some Django stuff. Django? Yeah.
You're an Easter and Christmas Rails guy.
I don't even know what that means, but Easter and
people
Christmas.
that like don't go to church except for on Easter and Christmas.
Oh, right. Yeah, because I'm like evangelizing these things. Now I've read a bunch of, their books, so maybe there's that.
Okay.
I remember Remote was like, I'm trying to pitch that at the MLM I worked for, and they were like, you are crazy. We don't believe in this. But anyway, I digress.
I think people call it a back-end thing because, it runs on the server. Like, it's not fully client-side. But we just use it for rendering. So, like, it runs at the edge. It makes API calls to our true backend, and then it renders HTML, returns to the browser.
So
just so
you
that we
use
get
it.
SSR,
So do you? You do SSR, or do you do static site with client interactivity?
Our blog is fully static site. The app is server-side rendered, and then the client takes over. That's kind of the default, like, universal rendering mode of Nuxt.
Yeah. That's not a terrible place per se. Like, I'm not offended by anything you said necessarily.
We don't use an ORM, and we use Postgres.
Okay. Well, you trust yourself, so I guess I get that. Yeah, I mean, it's server-side render, so that's where some of those things are happening. I get that. I don't know. It starts to get gray there, and, I know Ryan Florence feels like that should all become React Blue. And I'm not necessarily thinking that is for me, but he's a smart guy. It's not the end of the world. I just don't think it's the only answer. I guess it's simple as that. It's like, sure, I see where you're going, and there are some you're really like fine tuning the race car in that. Like, right? Like, is that gonna make a difference for most applications? I don't think so. I don't think it is. I think like
you're talking about choosing to not use an ORM, or
from like, say, a front end framework perspective, and this is why you're trying to say that, like, some folks will say this is back end because why? Because it's server side rendered and you are talking to the database directly, right? Yeah, I don't know. I could probably be convinced either way. This is the saucy part that I'm not giving you too much sauce on. For me, I'd rather kind of add some sugar there and some guardrails, and I guess it like depends. How big's the team working on it, and are there concerns with like things breaking too easily? Is it dangerous to the data? And I don't know what calls are happening in that SSR. Maybe it's not like crazy sensitive PII stuff or whatever else.
We think of we call it the edge rendering server,
right,
as a front end. Like, there's nothing sensitive happening on it.
Yeah.
The back end is an API that handles all the auth. Anything that the edge rendering server can do, you can do in your browser, basically, is how
Gotcha. Yeah. So it's really just like a speed thing. Just makes it like it's performance. I don't know.
Yeah.
And those are the gray areas that I think are good. Like, that I think that took I worked on Ember apps for quite a few years, and Ember did a lot of like really cool things that they took from Rails, and this is why I know about Rails things, mostly because the concepts came right into Ember. active record stuff, data management through like the front end there. It's a nice sugar around like your API calls and all of that kind of stuff. But at a certain point in a heavy application, that gets really slow. So like, what do you do? And you've offloaded too much to the browser at this point. So this whole SSR of some of the things to like have it come to the client with some of the work done, because servers are cheap now. I mean, we offloaded to the clients because things were too slow in the back end, and we didn't have the cloud and things weren't quite so cheap, so we offloaded to the clients. We've seen like kind of a regression around that over the last few years. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have any critiques per se. I still wouldn't call Nux a backend framework, but outside of that, it all totally makes sense. Like to me, it sounds like you are aligning your application UI with the kinds of data it needs to render, and then just trying to make it, fine tune it to where like the non-sensitive data comes quick, and the things that need to be protected, maybe need deeper computation on all of that stuff, utilizes your API. That all makes sense to me. That's a happy place for me. So I wouldn't call that a Frankenstein until you tell me like, well, yeah, our login is here, and we pay whatever data cruncher for our visualizations, and you have all of those things where you're like hodgepodging an app together.
Yeah. So okay, that's where I'm definitely not Frankensteining, because like we roll our own auth, for example. In fact, we try to roll most of our own stuff when it makes sense. Auth is a funny one to me, like, because, for example, I would never in a million years want to take on the burden of doing credit card processing.
Yeah,
like roll my own credit card processing, right? We use Stripe.
For sure.
Like, I can't imagine that being a good idea. You'd have to be like one of the big tech companies, I think, for that to like make strategic sense.
Yeah.
But auth is hilarious to me because it took me like less than a day to set it up, and like it's just like magic link, sign in with Google, sign in with GitHub. Like, this is not rocket science. I don't know why I'm being told so often that I should be rolling my own auth, but like these things get equated, and I'm not opposed to using third-party stuff for stuff, right? We have third-party. Sure. We use PostHog for like our product analytics.
Oh yeah, I love them. Yeah,
it's like
again, you don't want to roll your own analytics though, right? Like,
yeah. So it's interesting, but like the trade-offs sometimes, and I think especially to new developers that are building projects for the first time, it's not obvious that like rolling your own auth is like 1/1000th of the effort as rolling your own credit card processing. Yeah. And it only becomes apparent once you've done it a couple times.
Well, I mean, that's like the like a really great marketing sleight of hand that's happened, right? Like that companies come in, and I think a lot of it is about how pervasive things like just React has become because of the heavy hiring needs and who can you hire. And they're coming out of boot camps quickly, great, amazing. And again, no shade if you have passion and that's your path. I'm self-taught, like totally dig that. I have no problem with that. But you are oftentimes taught React, so they're coming out knowing how to knowing how to create interfaces in React. And maybe they're learning some sort of like state management to a degree, but like they're not teaching them how to roll their own auth. And then they get into places and, okay, you can use a provider for that. There's a bunch of them. They're really big. They've solved this problem. The marketing works. Drop these components in. Here, put your API key in and get to building your app, right? Like the marketing is strong and it's not necessarily wrong. It's just that I don't think enough people know what those trade-offs are, is that you've gotten bed deeply for this gatekeeping to your application. They have all of your user data. Are you okay with that? Because now you're duplicating efforts. You still need to know who's logged into your site and something about them. So how, and tying those together now gets you in bed deeper and deeper and deeper. And then all of a sudden you get a $20,000 bill for auth.
Do you know where they are taught to roll their own auth?
I don't. Want to know? Okay, yeah, you teed me up there. I should have been ready for this. Want to know how to roll your own auth? Sign up at Boot.dev. Use the coupon Whiskey Web and whatnot for 20% off. That's not a coupon. Don't do that. Sorry.
Yeah, it won't work. Sorry.
No,
Didn't
it
have
won't.
time
You
to
can.
compare
You
it.
could try it. But,
You can try it.
Yeah.
Our
That's it.
very secure checkout system
Yeah.
will not give you a discount.
Not give you a discount. I think the one I know is Prime, right? Isn't it like Prime? Is it just
Prime,
Prime?
25% off?
10? Prime 25, even better. 25% off. Prime 25.
appreciate
or it's
that.
just Prime. Yeah.
Support
I'm
the
into that.
PrimeAgen directly by using this coupon code.
Exactly. That's true. He made content. I didn't do shit. I showed up in your podcast. Why should I have a code? Use his. He's a nice guy. He's a lot nicer than I am and not drunk as much at all. So I would listen to him.
That is true. Based on my experience hanging out with you guys in Montana.
Yeah.
That is true.
One of us was chugging whiskey and one of us is like, I got to leave early. I'm only going to have one. So that's my impression.
Had a
I hope
stream
he
to
doesn't
do,
listen
yeah.
to this. Damn it. Yeah.
He doesn't. We're fine.
No. Yeah, he
doesn't have time to listen to this.
No, I know. Whatever else. Cool. So yeah, I think the Frankenstein ends up happening. And I don't necessarily mean it in a negative connotation, like you're coming out with an ugly app, because there's plenty of nice looking things that do. And I have friends and colleagues and whatever, peers or whatever who have put together applications in this way. I have done it. I've been a consultant and been in circumstances where it's like I can reach for OAuth and quickly get that part going, and because they don't want to pay me to roll my own auth for a couple of days. Sorry, Lane, you probably didn't write any tests for your auth, but I would, just so you know now. And so they're happy to be like, yeah, sure, it's $0 to start, $15 a month, and you have no users anyway, so let's go down this path. I've done it, but I've also seen the other side of like, well, now there's growth, now the costs are higher, now we need to do something a little weird, but we're utilizing this provider, and now we have to write super custom code to work around that. Like, there's just a lot of trade-offs there that I don't think are thought about when these like easy decisions are made. So I only mean Frankensteining is that you are piecing together bits of your application, and especially the parts that are just like fundamentally existing everywhere, right? Like every web app needs sign-in, because it's not a blog, it's not a static site, it's an application, right? You need that. A lot of them have to send out transactional emails. So that is, there's part of it that you probably do want to use a provider for, right? Because they're all whitelisted, and that's the winning, easy part. But you loop into their API and you have your own mailer and scheduler, things like that, like queues, right? You can pay a service to do your queues, or you can write cron jobs, and you can do all these other things. So I think that when you talk about fundamental aspects of the application, the more that you pass off that burden to other companies, the more it starts to get a little like piecemealed together. And what is the actual, like, what are the parts you own? What is the application logic that you actually are like responsible for there? And what are you paying someone else to be responsible for?
Let me introduce to you a word. You start a new job at a company and you look at the stack and you go, ugh, this is disgusting. This is a Frankenstein piece of shit. I'm not saying you do that, but like, I mean, I've done that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. It's not your code base, right? Yeah. It's easy to be really critical of it. Like, oh, this is a piece of shit, Frankenstein, hodgepodge, whatever. Yeah. On the other hand, the senior dev who architected it might say, they might use this other word. They might say it's very composable. It's like the same, like Frankenstein and composable. I could make an argument that like those basically, they could be referring to the same thing. There's just a different connotation as to the quality of the connectedness of the pieces.
That's how I know they're senior, because they've learned how to get buy-in, how to sell into their ideologies. There's plenty of positives out of that. Like, good for you. You kind of know how to get your stakeholders on board, how to get your team members potentially on board because of all these potential nuances into composing those pieces into other parts. I mean, real world, it's not so hot swappable per se, but I mean, that's just, again, a degree of marketing.
So I think there is a real, like, people are going to lie about their own stacks, obviously. But like, I think there is a real quality distinction in the sense that, okay, one of the reasons I like building backend applications in Go is because you're encouraged kind of by the standard library and the ecosystem to write really composable services. So, it doesn't come with an ORM out of the box. It doesn't come with a lot of things, but it comes with a lot of kind of common interfaces. So like all of the ORMs or all of the SQL connectors use the standard libraries like database SQL package. There's kind of a standard way to do HTTP stuff. All the cryptography libraries are there. So you can write your services in such a way that like when you decide to switch from SendGrid to MailChimp or whatever, it's like a pretty simple and easy to swap process. And I'm not saying you can't do this in other languages and frameworks. You absolutely can. But with like a full stack framework, it's not that there's not composability at all. It's that you're using what you're given. Mm-hmm. So if you don't like the Rails, what's called active record, right?
Yeah.
There's probably a way to swap it out, but it's not like they go out of their way to get you out of there. And I think in my mind, it's like high risk, high reward in the sense that I think if you write your Go services really well, they're easier to maintain long term and to scale with than a lot of the full stack frameworks. But at the same time, it's easy to do it wrong, and it's easy to kind of take that third party service and embed it everywhere within your application code, such that refactoring it is a nightmare that takes weeks and months. Swapping off of whatever ORM you picked, again, like if you didn't write a really nice interface or whatever. That's been my experience. I don't know if what I'm saying even makes any sense. But
it makes total sense to me, just because I've had experience in both things. I mean, but inherently, right, this is one of those circumstances, well, I think for you it's a preference, right? But it is also like the right tool for the job, depending upon what kind of system you're designing or where it's being used and all of those things. Because, I mean, in all reality, both could exist in an organization because Go is essentially designed for microservices architecture, right? It's designed to do this thing really well, now have separate ones that do their thing really well. And then you oftentimes have that middle layer with Go architecture where, it's like your processing API or whatever it is. We called it the decision API. Like things would come in, and you also could like have questions where essentially you understood the answer already. And you have your nice caching there, so you're like popping that out at that layer.
We call it our API gateway. It's like the one part that's exposed to the internet, and like it contacts other services
exactly as needed. Yeah. So. And that's super awesome and nice, and like, what your system needs to do, like that's really smart architecture. And then, like you said, it's composable in that way because, that middle layer knows this particular service is the thing that gives it its answer. If you need to swap out what does that one part, it's obviously way easier. Right. I don't think that's a one-to-one equatable to being like I started my application with and I'm picking on auth a bunch just because it's top of mind, easy thing. There's a billion other things too, though. So like if you decide to use an auth provider, I'm going to back up to something you said, though, too, is that the interfaces are the same across the board in Go. And this is what you like, is like you have an assumed interface. And those interfaces are consistent, and so you just swap out to the other thing because most of it is the same interface, and that's where you can do that. But like providers out in the world, let's just say you have Auth0, you have Clerk, you have Supabase, you have many others doing auth and doing componentized auth, right? So that's supposed to be composable to a degree where you drop this component in. Yes and no, right? But each one does it differently, so you don't have an assumed interface. And so back to like something like Rails, they are making a bunch of decisions for you, right? And they are saying you can build really fast. You can go from 0 to 1 really quick. And the win is that we've made a bunch of choices here. We have opinions about that. And if you just follow that happy path, you're going to get a lot done. Now, the problem there is that they have an opinion, and if you disagree with that opinion, backing out of it, writing custom things over top of it, integrating things that don't follow that conformity become a problem. Of course, absolutely, that's true, right? And so then you are like, do I go off the happy path and start screwing things up? And then now my upgrade path, there's just trade-offs. So you just kind of need to understand the tools, what they give you, where their limits are, and how you set those boundaries in between. Because, hey, you could easily have a Rails application with its own things, and then you hit some boundaries, and there's computational things you need to do outside of that. That Rails API now talks to API Gateway, and it's a whole other system over here. And that's fine. You just need to understand that your architecture grows in that way, and that's how you solve those problems. And this is why, like we were saying early on, it's really important that you take your learning and build some things, even if it becomes a failure, because you're going to understand where those failure points are. And then before you even get in bed with any of that stuff, it's not just I quickly set up a thing and here's my app, and I don't know, I didn't get 64 users in 3 months, and so I'm out. Like, fuck that. That's not usually how that works. So, yeah.
So, okay, all this talk, what is Charles building with in 2024? What is the stack that you prefer at the moment?
I hate them all. No, I have found myself more interested in some of the things that I've used prior to, or things that I may have skipped over. So full stack web application frameworks, I actually think I want to try Rails finally. And some of in Rails 7, what I really believe ideologically is that DHH has come back to existing web technologies and saying, how can I better leverage HTTP2? Maybe we don't need bundlers because now loading your files is a lot faster. SSR does a lot for us. I think some of this came up into, I love Astro. I think Astro solves a bunch of use cases for, dashboards and stuff. It's sort of you could do all this in Astro now, and it gets a lot simpler. So I like those. I've come back to looking at Django again, just because it's really good. It's lasted a long time. It's a nice CMS that's super customizable. Actually, it uses SQLite out of the box now, so you can start to work rapidly locally. Our friend Carson, HTMX is a big part of that community too. And so I appreciate and embrace a lot of less is more until you need more. So why are we going crazy here? So I don't know if it's an artifact of me just being inspired about looking at existing web APIs and technologies that have been coming out. Just all kinds of cool things. I've kind of been out of the CSS world for a while and taking the easy path with Tailwind, but there's a ton of CSS that you can do without frameworks. That's super cool. Masonry layouts, things like that are really neat. Web APIs that allow you to do dialogues and popovers with attachment and all this kind of stuff that we've been doing with JavaScript libraries that you don't really need anymore. I think all of coming back to the tools of the web and what a browser can do on its own is really interesting and intriguing me because I feel like things have gotten so complex. I'm regressing quite a bit. The last thing I actually built with Redwood.js because I was curious, even though there was aspects about it I didn't like or wouldn't have chosen if I was piecing my own together. I really appreciated that it was it made a bunch of choices for me and gave me auth, mailer, GraphQL APIs. I could create my own webhooks with a generator. I love generators. That's what I missed about Ember is oh yeah, I need a new component, need a new route. It just does all the things, spins out tests for me. Easy mode, give me all the things, batteries included.
Code generation?
Yeah, absolutely. So in its CLI, I think Angular has it. Angular has the CLI, Ember has the CLI, so Redwood has a CLI also. And you can just tell it what you're trying to spit out, and it just creates everything and tests and everything for you.
Give you the boilerplate one.
Gives you all the stuff. So it's pretty nice.
Interesting. I'm really disappointed you didn't say Go. I was hoping 2024 was the year for Charles.
I have dabbled in Go. I actually was an engineering manager for a company called Acquia out of Boston. They're known as the Drupal company, but never touched any Drupal. They had a bunch of marketing like smart marketing software essentially, and
I was
most
gonna say
of
Drupal. That's some cutting edge shit.
yeah,
That's,
some cutting edge shit. Hey, it did all right for them, but it was like dynamic content engines for marketing. So you could create a bunch of like targeting and segmentation and whatever else, and it would come up with content specifically for that. And so that was powered by a bunch of Java services, a bunch of Go services, and then a Go middle layer. That was the decision API that would figure all that cool stuff out for us. And then it was like Ember applications on the front end.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So Go is not I think I would come back to Go before I tried to learn Rust. I'll say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it will take about 1/8 of the time, so would highly recommend.
Yeah, that's fair.
I've met a lot of people that are like, don't have time to learn Go. I'm deep into this Rust thing, and I'm like, you could probably learn Go in the amount of time it would take you to like get the next 10% of the way in Rust.
Exactly that.
Not
And
a knock
also,
on Rust. I think Rust is badass, but it's
but
the levels of complexity are not the same.
Yeah, super fast. Do you want to make a super fast like dev tool, because that seems to be like what everybody's doing in Rust, or do you want to get a job? How about that? And I think that the Go jobs are probably. How about this though? Let's say I do want to learn Go. Could I go to Boot.dev and learn Go?
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
But not
Code Prime.
Whiskey. Yeah.
Yeah, don't
Code
use the
Prime,
other one
right.
that I made up before. Code Prime, 25% off.
Your first payment, not your subsequent payments.
Not all
Get
payments.
outta here
Just
with
get
that.
started for 25% off.
I think, man, we went an hour and 5 minutes on those two questions.
Yeah.
So I've got one final one, and we'll see.
It's a quick one.
See how long it takes. us.
No.
Does it seem like folks don't talk about security anymore? It's hilarious because I know you wrote this topic. I always ask my guests, like, is there anything in particular you want to talk about before the CrowdStrike thing?
Oh, right. Yeah. No. So that is an artifact also of like other interests. So I really love the podcast Darknet Diaries. Shout out to Jack Resider, who makes very interesting content there. And he's, I guess he's an entertainer and in some circles celebrity, and more in the security side of things. And so I just, from listening to that show, I become more and more interested in like information security and privacy and all of that. And I do remember at times like when as a developer we cared a lot more about security and a lot more about like accessibility as well. And I feel like a lot of that is kind of gone by the wayside. It kind of
Really, you
sucks.
think accessibility has gone down as a trend? I feel like that's like top of mind.
Maybe it depends on what you're working on and where you're working. But in a lot of my recent experience, let's just say the last 5 years, so a chunk of that is definitely in the consulting world, and the client does not want you to spend any time in those
Is it
arenas.
B2B SaaS? Because I feel like in B2C, accessibility is like super important and everyone talks about it. And in B2B, like SaaS, nobody
It's
talks
like
about it because you got like 20 clients and like, unless they explicitly ask for accessibility features, you just kind of don't ship them.
Let's say, I can't say the company, but I can say they are a $2 billion e-commerce platform that, by the way, that we re-platformed from like Java and PHP into a Next.js site with a GraphQL middle layer speaking to a bunch of old Java services that they were not willing to rewrite or touch, but that we added like, some Redis caching and things all the way to. So they cared about speed. They definitely did not care about any level of accessibility. And they're selling to like universities and research labs and things of that nature. So that's all I could say about that. And there was no concern whatsoever about accessibility. I'm surprised they cared enough to even improve the site like speed and security, because they were already printing money as is. So, and it could be my bubble though, but in my it just didn't. There was a massive wave for accessibility, and there were folks whose job it was to work on that and educate their teams and test things and all of that. And I just have seen a lot less of it. I feel like the time that we had...
When are you referring to roughly?
like when it was important, like 10 years ago, it
Yeah.
definitely was big time important. And at that time, let's say I was probably still working for National Geographic. We had millions of users all the time. It was a lot of news content. It was really important that it was both accessible, and accessibility improved SEO. And then also there was some sort of machine ingestion of the content because some of it would be scientific, things of that nature. So because of those reasons, it was top of mind for us. But I just haven't seen that to be across the board. Like, do you know people? Like, I felt like there was a whole slice of development teams that were dedicated to accessibility, and I've seen a lot less of that. And we've gone through the time where there was a massive scale up in developer relations, though. But I don't think there was a focus in accessibility at that time. So
Yeah, I probably am just the wrong person to even ask about it, about accessibility in particular, because my career before Boot.dev was all B2B SaaS. And yeah, there was never really a big focus on it.
Internal use, they don't care as much and that kind of thing. Yeah.
SEO is not even a marketing
and the laws
strategy
don't
for
apply.
them, right?
Yeah, and the laws don't apply the same way, I don't think. So
yeah, and like a lot of internal
when
tooling, and like I was a backend dev, so like even if they were working on accessibility, they wouldn't have consulted me about it.
No, you wouldn't know anything about it. You're just like, I don't know. Here's the JSON.
Yeah, exactly. Is my JSON accessible?
Yeah,
it is if you know how to use curl and JQ.
Yeah, there you go.
But security is interesting. Okay, here's my like take on kind of the like hotness of security. My experience in the web development world is that at least the companies I've worked at have had way more web developers than security people, like cybersecurity people. Like, and it's not close, right? It's like 100 developers, maybe you have like 2 or 3 people that are kind of dedicated to security. And it depends on a bunch of things, like what kinds of clients you have and how sensitive the data is. Frankly, I've worked at companies where a lot of the data just isn't all that sensitive. The most sensitive thing we have is like a username and password. And so like that might be a component of it. But my experience has always been like the industry needs more developers than it needs cybersecurity people. But the fascinating thing is so many people are like kind of interested in cybersecurity and getting into cybersecurity. And I don't know if this is true, but my perception has been like that the market for becoming a cybersecurity professional is like extremely saturated. And I think it has to do with this attention thing. Like, for example, Darknet Diaries, incredible podcast, wildly popular because guess what? Not just cybersecurity people listen to it. Everyone listens to it. It's like true crime for people
geeks.
that like computers. Yeah. You don't have to be a developer to listen, but like this podcast, no. Like we'll never, even if we were wildly popular within our niche, it's just not going to have that kind of wide appeal.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Yeah, and are things like, I don't know, like hacking and computer stuff and film and TV shows and all of that, maybe that's added a sexiness to it that makes it more interesting and pervasive. I don't know, the idea of like hacking being more than just banging away at a keyboard. There's like the social engineering aspect and other things. I'm really disappointed I don't get to go to DEF CON this upcoming weekend. It's a thing that I've wanted to do the last 2 years, and both years I have a conflict, so I'm really planning to do 2025. So yeah, it's interesting when you think about that because like I think it's probably like an artifact of you have businesses that think all the value is in feature creation and less so, accumulation and feature creation and, continuing to like turn that screw, add new things, improve things and all of that. And that's where all the resourcing goes into rather than just protect just in case, right? Like it's and cybersecurity is more about that because it's not as proactive. It's a little more defensive unless you're in a compliance situation. And then, you're going to get some testing, but what is that? Like once a year or whatever it is, then, you fix the thing and your consultant goes away and then everybody starts working on features again. So it's just not top of mind for those reasons, I think, in most situations.
I don't actually have an opinion on whether or not like the companies I worked at in particular should have been focused more or less on cybersecurity. Like we never had any serious incidents while I was there, so it didn't really come up. But it makes sense to me that if you work at a bank, right? Like for a bank, I imagine that they employ an incredible number of cybersecurity specialists. Or like, I know, for example, that when PayPal got started, the thing that was killing the business, the thing that like Max Levchin famously like wrote an algorithm for or built a system for to prevent fraud, like that was the thing that saved the business. Like, you know, updating the design of the PayPal front end wasn't going to save the business, but, you know, stopping all this fraud that was happening was. So it makes sense to me that, like, depending on the industry, you'd see wide, like, huge swings in terms of how many resources are being, how much resources? How many resources? English? Are being, you know, dedicated to cybersecurity versus, like, shipping new features. And, like, for example, with Boot.dev, we don't have any cybersecurity people yet. There's only 6 developers.
You have my resume, though, right? I mean, you know, I have dreams of doing cybersecurity for Boot.dev, right?
You must have mistyped my email. I never got it.
Yeah, you didn't get that. That's weird. Yeah. That's weird. Right. And then, of course, it's like not ubiquitous, but it does feel like another thing that, again, is kind of like to the wayside. I don't know. Like, yes, there are obvious answers like banks and governments and things like that that have a ton of personal information. Whether you like that or not, you know, is a whole other conversation. But I mean, any business that you're transacting with has some personal information potentially of yours, you know, and in your circumstance, you offload that to another business, but there is some thing that happens there. I don't know how at risk any of that is, but if I give you my credit card, I know that kind of gets fostered off to somewhere else, but I input it somewhere. Am I inputting it right into Stripe? I don't know. Or am I inputting it into something for, you know, that is Boot.dev that then ends up going through your processor? I don't know. So there's not a zero touch thing. Or, you know, for whatever reason, I want to go and hack everybody who didn't finish the Python course because, you know, they only know half, and there's a vulnerability there, and I get some personal information that I can do some things. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder. I don't know enough about it, but I'm very intrigued.
No, it's incredibly important to, like, the idea that developers, and particularly backend developers, should be more well-educated and familiar with, like, the basic tenets of cybersecurity.
Yeah.
I'm so on board with that. The idea of, like, a lot of SaaS and kind of out-and-out CRUD products needing more dedicated cybersecurity folks or cybersecurity research, I think, for me, the jury's definitely out on that one because, like, to kind of, I know it was rhetorical, but in the case of like Stripe with Boot.dev, like, yeah, we just send you to the hosted Stripe checkout page and like offload all that security stuff. So kind of the worst case scenario data breach for Boot.dev would be like someone gets access to what we've kind of determined are the private fields of like your user record, which is like your email address. Is that it? I can't, like, because we don't even store passwords because we use magic links.
Yeah. Why did you want my birthday and mother's maiden name though? That was
we don't have
social security number. That was weird. Did I go to the right place?
No, and I think to booty.dev, not boots.dev, or not boot.dev. It's a whole.
Yeah,
you got
that's a different podcast. By the way, Booty.dev. The code Prime probably doesn't work there though because he doesn't believe in porn. So, well, I mean, he believes it exists. He thinks it's bad. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's an old profession, right? So, anyway, Booty.dev, Whiskey Web and whatnot does work as a promo code. So, go with that. Yeah, I think I holistically agree with you though, right? Like, I think we should, as web developers and especially seasoned web developers, should have a basic understanding of cybersecurity. And then there are dedicated professionals that go deeper if necessary. And many applications out there probably don't need it. So I would say that. But yeah, the funny thing is just I think like myself, I've been doing this for like 20 plus years. I don't know anywhere near enough as I probably should. That's all. Like in that time frame, becoming a senior engineer, senior developer, I think you should know a lot more about your tooling and like the things that are happening adjacent to.
I don't know if this is something that you ran into, and I promise I'll wrap it up because I know we've been going for a minute. But
Shut up. I'm hungry. No, I'm just kidding. It was fine.
the one thing I ran into when I was pretty new to backend development was because I felt very ignorant about cybersecurity and the security of the stuff that I was building. And I had like this imposter syndrome, I guess you could call it. I would like blindly follow as many best practices as I could find. Like, oh, CSRF token, I'm going to figure out how to shove that in there. Like, I heard I need it. I don't know what it is, but like apparently if I throw this tag on there, it's more secure. Right. And so I was just kind of like doing things. And something that really helped me was when I started to think about it a lot more from like first principles of like, okay, I know my application. How could I possibly like extract something vulnerable from it? Right? Like, could I hit this endpoint in such a way that it would return something that it probably shouldn't? And not to say that best practices should be ignored or anything. Like I think obviously it's important to think about that kind of stuff. But like, I guess I'm almost arguing for like going a little bit deeper, like understanding what a CSRF token does. And it's like, is that even relevant to my application at all? Right? Because I'm just returning JSON as opposed to like HTML that's going to be rendered in a browser.
Right.
So anyways, it's I guess at the end of the day, I'm just advocating for the same thing. Like just go a little bit deeper and understand what this stuff is.
Yeah, exactly. Like have some patience. And early in your career, you should be given patience. And hopefully folks are in an environment where that's encouraged. Like, oh yeah, well, I'm trying to understand this concept a little bit more. Maybe either on my own or I reach out into my team and ask some questions and just, try to dig a little deeper to get a better like depth and breadth across the board as you move forward. So otherwise, maybe you make some mistakes and break something, and that's okay too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for coming on, Charles. Obviously, Whiskey, Web, and Whatnot, incredible podcast that has not had me on yet, which is a huge mistake. But you someday
you are on the schedule, and you know what day it is.
That's right. I am on the schedule. I always
You're
forget.
on the
it's
schedule
like way out in the
for
future.
September 11th. By the way, good pick.
Yeah, that's, you guys must
Whoa,
be.
you better bring the house
guests.
down. Oh, bad jokes. Alrighty. Whiskey, Web, and Whatnot. You can buy some cool. Say you hate React. Well, we have React was a mistake at whiskey.fund. I don't know. Other stuff like that. Otherwise, just listen if you want, or don't.
Where else can people find you? Twitter? You got anything else you want to plug?
No, you can always start with whiskey.fm. You can find my Twitter there. You can find our videos elsewhere. If I'm not overly annoying to you from those venues, send me a message on Twitter. We'll go from there.
Okay. Talk to you later. Thanks for coming on.
Ciao.